War doesn't begin with gunfire. It begins with silence. The kind of silence that's so heavy, it feels like a physical weight pressing down on you. It's the silence of 100 hearts beating in unison. A symphony of fear and anticipation. It's the silence before the storm, before the world erupts into a cacophony of chaos and destruction. For Elias Weber, that silence was the loudest thing he had ever heard. It was 1943. Elias was just 18, but the boyish charm in his eyes was already fading, replaced by a hardened gaze that had seen too much, too soon. He was a soldier now, a cog in the great, grinding machine of the Second World War. His boots, caked in mud and grime, marched in lockstep with thousands of others, each step a drumbeat counting down to the inevitable. They were moving through a landscape that felt alien, a place stripped of all color and life. The trees were skeletal, their bare branches reaching out like desperate hands towards a bruised, indifferent sky. A thick, soupy fog clung to the ground, swallowing everything in its path, blurring the line between friend and foe, between reality and nightmare. Elias clutched his rifle, his knuckles white. The cold metal was a stark, uncomfortable reality in his hands. It felt heavier than he remembered from training, weighted down by the unspoken question that hung in the air. Would he use it? Could he? He was a farm boy from a small town where the loudest sound was the church bell on Sunday morning. He had never held a weapon with the intent to harm, never imagined a world where taking a life was not just a possibility, but a duty. He glanced at the men around him. Their faces were a mosaic of emotions. Some were stoic, their expressions unreadable masks of steel. Others wore their fear openly, their eyes wide, their jaws clenched. He saw a boy no older than himself, his face pale and slick with sweat, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Elias wondered if his own fear was as visible, as tangible as the cold breath that misted in front of his face. He remembered his mother's last letter, her words a warm embrace in the freezing cold of this foreign land. "Be brave, my son," she had written, "and come home safe." The words echoed in his mind, a painful reminder of a life he had left behind, a life he might never return to. Suddenly, a whistle pierced the silence. It was a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the fog and the fear. It was the signal. The silence was over. The world exploded. The ground shook as artillery shells rained down, each explosion a monstrous roar that ripped the earth apart. The air was filled with the demonic whistle of bullets, the screams of men, and the deafening, relentless chatter of machine guns. The fog, once a silent enemy, was now a treacherous veil, concealing death in its every fold. Fear. It was a cold, sharp thing that twisted in his gut. But as the chaos intensified, as he saw the first man fall, a friend he had shared a cigarette with just an hour ago, the fear began to morph into something else. Something darker. It was a primal, desperate instinct to survive, a rage that burned hotter than any fear. He was no longer Elias Weber, the farm boy. He was a soldier. He was a target, and he was a weapon. He followed his sergeant's orders, his movements becoming automatic, a grim dance of survival. He ran. He ducked. He crawled through the mud and the blood. The world had shrunk to the few feet of ravaged earth in front of him. Every shadow, every flicker of movement could be his end. He fired his rifle, the recoil jolting his shoulder, the sound joining the deafening orchestra of war. He didn't know if he hit anything. He didn't want to know. He fighted again and again, feeding the insatiable hunger of the battlefield. He saw things that day that would be seared into his memory forever. Images that would haunt his dreams, that would wake him in a cold sweat for years to come. The vacant stare of a young German soldier, his life extinguished in an instant. The desperate cries for a medic that were swallowed by the roar of a nearby explosion. The smell of gunpowder, sweat, and something else, something coppery and metallic that clung to the air and coated his tongue. It was the smell of death. As the hours bled into one another, Elias felt a part of himself begin to die. The boy who had loved the smell of fresh-cut hay, who had dreamed of one day owning his own farm, was being buried under layers of mud, blood, and gunpowder. In his place, a soldier was being forged in the brutal crucible of battle. He was learning the terrible arithmetic of war, where life was cheap and survival was the only prize. This is just the beginning of Elias's story. This is the moment when the guns began to fire. But it was in the silence that preceded it that his war truly began. It was in that heavy, pregnant silence that he lost his innocence. This series is inspired by the real events and experiences of soldiers during World War II. Some of the scenes and descriptions you will hear may be disturbing. If you are struggling with your own mental health, please know that help is available. There are resources and people who want to support you. You can find links in the description below. This was episode 1 of When the Guns Fell Silent, a cinematic story series told through the eyes of those who lived it. If you believe in the power of true stories and cinematic storytelling that honors history and enjoyed this style of narration, please subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter of Elias's journey is coming soon. Thank you for listening.